What was there before newspapers? Ever thought about that? Perhaps you've seen how in movies, messengers race back from the battlefields with reports on victories or defeats. Word of mouth was the primary source of spreading the news. Humans exchanged news long before they could write. Merchants, sailors, and travelers brought the news to the continent. Then, peddlers and traveling players picked them up and spread them from town to town. Criers walked through villages announcing births, deaths, marriages, and divorces. But how did the history of newspapers begin? Among the first ones who found a written way to distribute the news were the ancient Romans. Acta diurna, or the daily doings, were created by the government and contained information for the public such as chronicles of events, births, deaths, and daily gossip. These daily doings are considered to be one of the first precursors to the modern newspaper. 1440 was an important year for the publishing world. Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, and the history of newspapers was influenced significantly. The printing press allowed for the high-quality reproduction of printed materials at a rate of nearly 4,000 pages per day. In other words, 1,000 times more than can be done by a scribe by hand. The appearance of the printing press also brought the appearance of the first newspaper. Yes, you've heard me right, the very first newspaper that has ever been published. When? 1609. Where? In Germany. By whom? Johann Carolus. What was its name? Relation al... you know what? Whatever, you see it on screen. News spread out faster than expected. In a short period of time, all of Europe was populated with newspapers, and they even made their way to the New World, America. On September 25th, in 1690, in Boston, Benjamin Harris published Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic, the first American newspaper. Everyone thought that they had the liberty to write the news freely and truthfully. Unfortunately, that was not the case. A concept like freedom of press was soon introduced in 1791. You've probably heard about this. The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights guaranteed the liberty of expressing yourself in the U.S. But it wasn't until 2 years later that Thomas Jefferson obtained the freedom of the press, for real and for good. Right after this great achievement, more and more newspapers were published in America. But they were so expensive that only the wealthy ones could buy them. That was only until the 1830s, when technology changed the course of events and made it easier for publishers to print and distribute newspapers. With the help of the penny press, the news became available for everyone. The Sun was the first penny press newspaper in the United States that sold copies for just a penny. The history of newspapers was highly influenced by the Industrial Revolution. Giant presses capable of printing 10,000 papers per hour contributed to the massive growth in the newspaper industry. From 2,526 newspapers in 1850 to more than 11,000 newspapers by 1880. And by 1890, some papers boasted circulation above 1 million copies. Moving on to the early 20th century, when color photographs and other elements such as banner headlines, illustrations, and comics revolutionized the look of the newspapers. Speaking of comics, The Yellow Kid is one of the first U.S. newspaper comic strips that existed from 1895 to 1898 and was a huge success. Though the addition of color made the newspapers even more popular, they started to face serious competition when the radio and television made their debut. News over the radio was immediately available rather than waiting for the next day to wake up and buy the newspaper.
Good evening. Here is the official weather forecast from the United States Weather Bureau at the Billings Airport.
And then, the news formats on television were a lot more engaging when compared to the print or radio because it was something modern and way faster. People were glued to their television sets between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. to catch the latest political, sports, and weather updates. Still, the newspaper continued to be a reliable source to read the latest news compared to the new media. The information was written and detailed, and people could reread the newspaper as many times as they wanted. Fast forward to today. Once again, technology and the appearance of the computer, and most importantly, the internet, was a big game changer. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are two old, prestigious newspapers that are still making good numbers selling printed publications. Even if we're living in a high-tech world, there are people who prefer the classic printed newspapers with their morning coffee. But the digital formats of these publications are also very popular. With just a few clicks, you can discover the latest news in the fastest way. The history of newspapers is still being written these days because people will always choose to be updated with the latest news. And with so much technology that surrounds us, everyone can create their own newspaper and express themselves freely. Platforms such as Flipsnack help you create your own newspaper exactly as you want. Populate it with your own content within minutes. Then choose to share it online with friends and family or print it for the sake of the classic newspaper.